So, hey, this is a video where I'm gonna autistically nerd out about the possible origins, both creatively and in the light world, of the character of Jevil, and then it's gonna pan out. I'm gonna talk about the light world general, not the light world, chapter one's dark world, and it's gonna start out mainly about Jevil because I have quite a lot I've noticed there lately. Also, note major spoilers for for the first two chapters of Deltarune. You'd think mainly chapter 1, but also there's some massive spoilers for chapter 2 that ended up in here, so be warned. Okay, so a Joker card is a card which depicts a jester which can stand in for any other card. It's found in some card sets, though not all. From what I understand, it's relatively rare, but it's a thing, okay? Now this is what Jevil is in the light world. He's a Joker card, as in it's a world of cards. That's what Chapter 1's Dark World is, and so he's the Joker card, and he's the one of those in the whole room. This explains the line, "I can do anything." It's not that he could literally do anything like a god. It in fact means he can do anything that a card can do, because his light world form can do anything that any card can do because it exists to stand in for other cards. This also means Jevil's powers are innate to himself, not a result of his insanity/enlightenment, or given to him by Gaster or the Knight or whoever. Now, the Joker card is not the most common meaning of the word Joker. In fact, while looking up images of Joker cards, I found quite a few images of the Joker, and considering that Jevil is quite an insane murderer, his whole shtick is, oh, let's have a game, and it's like, he's going, and it's like, oh, when your HP drops to 0, you lose, so it's basically whoever kills the other person first wins, and like shark to shark and all that. Considering all of those lines, I think conceptually he's basically just, what if you had a Joker card that was a literal Joker, as in like a crazy murderous psychopath? Although I will note that the insanity could also be taken as a stereotype of jesters in general, because believe it or not, just that Jevil, before being sealed away, was in fact the court jester of the Four Kings, because, a jester is what's depicted on the Joker card, believe it or not. So, yeah, that's all I have to say on Jevil. Okay, so, while this video started as a video on what could have been the creative inspirations of the character of Jevil and going into a deep dive on that, well, thinking about it, I had quite a lot of stuff I was thinking about when it comes to Chapter 1 in general, so I decided to replay through it, and now I have a whole lot of stuff I'm going to analyze about the whole chapter. Yep. This is a third video about Dark Worlds, third Deltarune video that is about Dark Worlds as a thing, or specifically in this case not a future Dark World like the previous two times, but this time a past Dark World, and though there are some implications I'm going to draw for future Dark Worlds and how we should predict them, but besides the point. Also, it gives this video a lot more content. As they say, 20 or bust. So, first of all, I'm going to make one thing perfectly clear. I want to clarify one very important thing, okay? So people often think of the first Dark World as being the castle town, the cliffs, as well as the area that Lancer and the card people and all live in. And I want to make something very clear. The area past the Great Barrier Gate, or whatever the fuck it's called, and the castle town are two entirely separate Dark Worlds. They have their own dark fountains. They exist in separate rooms. They have their own entire aesthetic. There's this one big door, which most likely represents this door between those same rooms in the real world, well, light world, and it's like that door serves as a portal between them, like, they're separate Dark Worlds, and I am talking about the world that is on the west side of the door. I'm going to make that completely 100% 10% clear before we go any further. The next thing I will talk about is a theme. So quite often when speculating about future Dark Worlds, we imagine they'll have themes. For instance, like, oh yeah, it's a TV world in Chapter 3, that's what everyone's speculating about. But frankly, I think that's wrong. This debunks my own predictions about Chapter 3, as well as the other prediction video, I'll admit. I think that they're just rooms turned into fantasy worlds. Like, Chapter 2 seems like it's a theme in the form of being the cyber world, but frankly, that's just a computer room turned into a fantasy world, and because there's so much computer stuff in it, that it's all computery. But frankly, I think it'll be more, every other Dark World will just be that room turned into a world more so, because there's not really a clear theme to the first Dark World. It's just kind of a playroom full of toys. I mean, I've always called it the card kingdom with my friends because it's a kingdom full of cards. It seems to be primarily, at least from what I could remember, primarily themed around like those sorts of very old medieval board games that are very outdated looking aesthetics because well they're from medieval times like chess and well cards, but that's not all of it. There's this one enemy called I forget its name, like the Blocky or something. I'm showing it on screen right now, and I couldn't remember what it is. But then I was playing through Chapter 1 again through research for this, it became very clear that its first attack. Yep, those are Legos. Or well, maybe they might be a Lego knockoff. Lego's been out of trademark for several years now. But yeah, but based on some of its other attacks, I think it's not necessarily Lego specifically so much as that general set of like building block toys that you get that are a thing. And the whole thing could be interpreted as a toy Dark World, albeit it seems so primarily focused on cards, which are not a very common toy for kids to play with. So I found it hard to call it a toy Dark World. And it's like, on one hand, although I do think it's also the case that the general playful attitude of all the characters in the world, where they don't seem to take things very seriously and act very immature and childlike, could also be used as an argument that it's a toy world. I mean, most of the things in the world are like the things scaled up, like the cards are turned into actual characters, but there are some exceptions, like Seam is a giant doll, but obviously he's scaled down, like this cat doll you can see in the real world. Also, yes, this room in the real world is very obviously the Dark World. Field of Hopes and Dreams, Chessboard, Scarlet Forest, Card Castles, this cupboard. Anyway, so yeah. Also, quick side note, I refer to the character as Seam out of habit because that's what everyone else refers to him as, but I want to note his name is pronounced Sham, and it does kind of annoy me that everyone calls him Sam, even though, and it's like, it's riffing off of the name Sean, which if you don't know is spelled S-E-A-M, especially in the UK and Ireland, and it's like some traditional spelling with like, I do prefer people to say S-H-A-W-N because I'm a big advocate for phonetic spelling, but like, his name's Sham, not Seam, okay? Just wanted to note that. Based on all these contradictions, I believe that the Dark Worlds aren't themed as much as we've imagined them as being, which again could have quite a lot of implications for future Dark Worlds. I mean, what if there's no theme in the next Dark World? I mean, the Undertale ties I found, present are loose. And again, the TV ties are even looser in Chris's house, so who knows what it is. Although, frankly, a thought I had is, in both the Cyber World and the Card Kingdom, the Dark Fountain was in a secure place in the cupboard, but Chris just made it in the middle of the room. So if Chapter 3 started out in the Dark World, but like the fountain was in some really easily accessible place, but it was in the middle of the room, and so it was instantly sealed, and then we went into another Dark World somewhere else. That is a possibility, I think. Also, another thing I noticed about the first time I went through Chapter 1 is the plotline that takes place within its Dark World seems to be extremely parallel to that of Undertale. Like, you have a character who's going about their life, then they fall into what at first seems to be underground, first into a very apathetic, empty area that's very strange, like the area where you meet Flowey. Then they enter this area of ruins where they meet a very nice character, like, I'll say Toriel. Oh, they're even both goat people, albeit I think that's more coincidental than anything else. And then the parallels drop, at least in terms of direct patterns, but the overall overarching narrative is still very parallel. For one, it's like, oh, in Undertale, the monsters were sealed underground by the humans. In Deltarune, it's that the Darkners were, like, sealed away and abandoned, left behind by the, by the Lightners. And then, in both cases, you have a king who rules over the area in a fairly authoritarian, fascistic way, who wants to basically take the monsters Undertale and the Light and the Darkners in Deltarune and break them free into the outside world where they're gonna take over, and they're gonna be the only ones in the world outside of the place where they're sealed. In the case of Deltarune, this is by spreading the darkness everywhere, so it's just all Dark World, so the Darkners live there. And in Undertale, this is via breaking the barrier and then Asgore taking over the world. And however, this is where the parallels starts to seize up. For instance, Asgore, in spite of what some fans would say, is actually a very compassionate and remorseful character. Like, if you go through his dialogue lines and look for how he behaves, he is clearly very remorseful about what he's doing, whereas, well, the Chaos King puts up a pretense of that, well, it's only a pretense. He seems very much genuinely to want to be malicious to the Lightners, whereas Asgore acted out of emotion years ago and politically can't go back, and so he's backed into a corner. Whereas the Chaos King, unironically, is just evil. Although I said that the Chaos King and Asgore, comparing him to Asgore, is where the parallels between Deltarune Chapter 1's Dark World and Undertale end, there's a couple more petty things. One, a lot of people compare Lancer to Sans because they have similar body shapes and personalities. In addition, the rooms leading up to the end of both thingies are very similar. You first go through for a throne room which has been tarnished. In the case of Undertale, that's Asgore's throne room, which has been tarnished by flowers overgrowing it and the abandonment of Toriel's chair. Then you go through a random empty room. Then you go through the room that's like at the very barrier, in the case of Undertale, the little barrier, in the case of Deltarune, this weird platform in front of the Dark Fountain. That's at the very end, right before the very exit, the magical barrier, the exit thingy, or Dark Fountain, that you have to do to get out of the place that you've ended up falling into. Then you have the thing that you go to actually seal away, slash travel through, slash break through, in order to get out into the light world slash surface. In addition, both Undertale and Deltarune have similar themes of basically mercy and don't kill everyone, just be peaceful and try to be peaceful, albeit Deltarune Chapter 1 almost seems like a retroactive rebuke and re-criticism of those themes. Undertale's just pushed blindly, whereas in Deltarune you have Relsei going about preaching them, and then basically it's proven that this chapter's story basically proves that those ideas aren't always right. Sometimes you just need to beat someone up, i.e. the Chaos King, and then imprison them. You can't convince them to your side, you just have to stop them. That is sometimes the case. It's like, overall, from that perspective, you could see, if we're reading it that way, you could see Deltarune Chapter 1 is almost like a revision of Undertale's story, and an abbreviation of it at that. But that's it for the Undertale parallels. And also, here's another note I'm going to make. You see this guy, the top chef? For a while I was puzzled as to what he is in the real world, but I think I've come to a conclusion. Look, he's yellow in a triangle. What real world thing is yellow in a triangle? Also, he makes food. So what thing is yellow, a triangle, and is affiliated with food? Why, a Dorito being affiliated with food by being food. And given that this is a playroom where you have kids and, kids are messy, I believe that in the light world, the top chef is literally just a random Dorito or some other type of tortilla chip that somebody left on the ground. It's a thought I had while making this, and I didn't know where to put it, but I wanted to put it in somewhere, so that's how it got in. So, here's Amelia in editing. So, I'm actually going to contradict my point and say it's wrong. I believed that he was a tortilla chip based on the fact he's yellow and he's associated with food. But here's the thing, given that most of the stuff in this world is toys, albeit quite old-fashioned toys, and again, focus on cards, which makes me kind of doubtful of the toy theme in some ways. One, there's that. Two, what else is yellow? Could be yellow. Oh, wood. 3, he spins. So I think he's actually a spinning top in the light world. I'm still gonna leave that note in. Ooh, here's an Undertale parallel I missed that I just noticed it's very strong here it is. In both cases, when you leave the ruinous area, in Undertale's case the ruins, in Deltarune's case the castle town, you can't go back, or in Deltarune's case that's at least within chapter 1, and that in both cases because of a gate. And when you, at the end of the ruins, you go through a gate and it only opens one way, so you're trapped outside of the ruins once go through that gate, well, except in a pacifist run sometimes, but for the most part, you're trapped outside of the ruins at that point. And in Deltarune, Relsei closes the giant golden gate between the Dark Worlds behind him, meaning that you can't go back. So that's another petty, if very strong, parallel. Also, a final note, the King of Spades will often depicted with 2 arms, where we only ever see 1 arm from him, even when he takes off the cape. I take this to indicate that, yeah, he only has 1 arm, which brings up a pretty interesting connection I could draw, which I will draw because autistic diagonal connection brain, but the King of Germany during World War I also only had 1 arm, and World War I is very aggressively associated with brutality, and the King of Germany is often very much blamed for World War I, at least in part. And, the Chaos King, a very brutal king. That's very loose and iffy, but I can't help but notice it and start pointing it out. Okay, so it's 0:41 and this video is finally done. I've been editing for the last, was it 2, 3, or 4 hours? I don't know. But the video is finally finished. I'm generally pretty proud of it. There's some things I could have done, I wish I did differently. I, honest to God, don't remember what because of how much I've been crunching to get this out before the weekend. Technically over, I mean, it's after midnight, so technically speaking, that means for the entirety of last week I didn't upload, but like, it's only midnight. It's like, I'm still maintaining the roughly weekly uploads. I mean, one of these days I am going to skip a week for mental health's sake, and or the upload's going to keep getting later and later until I effectively skip a week and then have a video early in the following week. I mean, I know that while I was talking about the Jevil stuff, I felt like there was something I was missing. I definitely wish I recorded that audio earlier when I had more passion to talk about that, but I procrastinated on it because there were some Game Theory videos I wanted to watch just to be familiar with the topic, because I thought they talked about Jevil more than they did. Unfortunately not. So that kind of annoys me. There's a whole bunch of things in the audio that's like, but I don't remember what they are at this point. And honest to God, I don't really care anymore. I'm generally proud of the video, but I know it's far from perfect, but I don't remember why. So yeah, that's that. Hit like and subscribe, but yada yada. I'm tired. I wanna relax. Goodbye, peeps.